So.
All right, I'm recording.
Thanks for the warning.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
great.
My name is what? My name is Alicen Grey. I'm a writer and a feminist, and my latest venture is a play called Jinx. It's my first full-length play, and it's getting produced at Thespis Theater Festival this August. It's a play about 5 vigilante women who castrate rapists, and I mean, I could leave it at that, and so far that's been enough of a tagline to get people interested, which is cool by me. So, yeah, I was simmering on feminism and how I think it's become so nice and polite, and how much more we could be doing, and so you'll see in the play, a major theme is how much further can we go, and, you know, what are we failing to do right now with our feminism, and how could we be impacting women more? And we don't have to go as far as castrating rapists, but could we maybe reclaim our autonomy in other ways? And could we encourage women to reclaim their autonomy in other ways? So ultimately, my play exists to encourage women and also inspire and provoke women to be angry, let themselves go there emotionally, and then use that anger. But I do want people to know it's also way more complex than that. You know, the play really explores the relationships between women in this extreme feminist movement, and the pitfalls of connections between women, and the way that trauma impacts their ability to help other women. And something that a major part of what inspired Jinx was my own observations of different feminist movements, circles I was part of, and how it was the women who were most traumatized by patriarchy, so women who were coming out of child pornography, women who were coming out of prostitution, women who were coming out of the porn industry, who had the most trauma and the most rage to work with, who were coming to these circles ready to do something about patriarchy. And then at the same time, even though that trauma was very useful in fueling their action, that same trauma was what was causing the downfall of these movements by creating this hostility between women, by causing them to turn against each other, and generally just replicate those same power dynamics we see in patriarchy, where there's someone who's dominant and someone who's submissive and someone who's beaten down and ostracized from a group for, you know, not obeying the rules, so to speak. And so it was this conundrum of like, how do we strike that balance between making space for women's trauma without letting it be the downfall of what we're trying to accomplish. So yeah, really the play explores the question of how do we challenge patriarchy in a way that doesn't emotionally burn out the women who are part of these movements. I would just like to think that when a woman sets her mind to creating space for women's stories and creating space to honor women's experiences of trauma, that just that commitment to uplifting women is enough to create this synergy where women are drawn to each other, and in a way that I don't think would be possible otherwise. I think that before you can have a movement or success in uplifting women, you first have to make the choice to be vulnerable and to commit yourself to emotional honesty and doing the work, and there's no turning back once you make that decision to stand by women. And once you make that decision, everything else seems to fall into place. Yeah. When I tell people that this play is about castrating rapists, there is a stark contrast between the general male reactions and the general female reactions. Men are like, that sounds cool, I guess I would want to castrate rapists. I support that, yeah. And it's, you know, it's supportive, but it's still pretty tepid, all things considered. And then women, on the other hand, are like, yes, let's castrate some rapists. I wanted to do this my whole life. I can't wait. And then they're like, I'm gonna tell my friends, I'm gonna tell my family, I'll do it myself. I wanna be part of this play. I don't have money, but I'll knit something for your costumes. And like, just women are like offering any skill that they have to be part of this production, and they're so excited. And I think that really speaks to not only the fact that rape culture is so much more personal for women, and it's an everyday reality we can't escape, and yet we don't often get the space to talk about it in an authentic and open, honest way. And it also speaks to the fact that women rarely get to collaborate with each other. I think in patriarchy, it's pretty standard that women are isolated from each other. It's hard for women to make connections and collaborate and have that synergy. And so when women find out that something like this is happening, there's this excitement of like, I've always wanted to do this, or I've always wanted to be part of something like this. And I'm just thrilled to be able to hold that space for women as we move forward with this production. So short term, I want to make people excited and help them understand why this kind of media is important, because Jinx, something that's important about it is that it passes every feminist media test. So the Bechdel test, the Mako-Mori test, the Sexy Lamp test, and a number of others. And that's so rare. It's so rare that a piece of feminist media even passes just the Bechdel test, let alone all the others. And that was a very conscious choice on my part as a playwright. As for the long term, I want Jinx to be canonical. I want it to be of the caliber of the Vagina Monologues, where it's so unapologetically feminist. You know, at the time Vagina Monologues came out, that was scandalous. And now, compared to what it permitted to come through and what it made space for and paved the way for, the Vagina Monologues is pretty tame, all things considered. And I think Jinx, in this day and age, is of the level of scandalousness, is that a word? That the Vagina Monologues was relative to its time period. And I think we as feminists should always be raising the bar and always be seeking to be even more provocative and challenge each other even more to outdo whoever came before us, and not in a competitive sense, but in an uplifting sense. So space is something that we need to talk about as feminists. Women, you know, it's consistent with just the fact that patriarchy is contingent upon women's boundaries being violated in every way. So not only physically with rape culture and the constant like attacking and breaking down of women physically, but also with mentally, women's self-perception is broken down and violated and infiltrated with the male gaze that we then internalize and use against other women and ourselves. And another way women's boundaries are broken is just spiritually, we don't really get to choose how we define ourselves, you know, and we don't get to connect with other women. There's so many ways in which women have to make concerted effort to maintain their integrity as individuals and also to maintain their bonds with other women. And that's characteristic of any oppressed class of people, whether we're talking people of color, poor people. Just something that's central to oppression is the inability to define oneself and have autonomy. So when we're thinking of spaces, I think the statistic is that women make up 52% of the population of the world, but only own, what was it, 1 or 10% of the world's territory? And that's insane. And then even within those spaces that women do own, they're still under constant surveillance by the male presence. And women can very rarely gather together and bond with each other and be safe together with each other without the threat of being infiltrated, without the threat of being ambushed or attacked or harassed for creating that space. So we see the disappearance of lesbian bars, and we see the disappearance of women's music festivals, and then we see women struggling to even get their foot in the door in the first place in established disciplines like theater, like film, like sports, like any arena that you can think of. Women are excluded by default. And so theater, I think, is a great symbol of that exclusion of women, because female directors have a hard time finding work, female playwrights have a hard time getting their plays produced, and there's misogyny in casting, and it's just all consistent with patriarchy at large. And so I think it's a perfect venue for something like Jinx. You know, metaphorically, Jinx challenges the way women are excluded from the arts and also from the world at large, just simultaneously, and that's a parallel I want to draw. That's something that can't necessarily be done strictly on paper, which is why Jinx is not like a story that I published online. I think it has to be a project where we command space and we have agency over it and we get to decide what we do with it. And it's such an empowering experience for women to finally know what it's like to be surrounded only by other women in a space, because that doesn't happen in everyday patriarchy.